I was 45 when I learned that the sister who shared my face had stolen the only thing I couldn't replace, and that the child she gave me as a nephew was actually my son. My name is Dr. Naomi Chen. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist in San Francisco. I spend my days helping people become parents, extracting eggs, fertilizing them, implanting hope into wombs that have been disappointed too many times. I'm good at it. I'm precise. I understand the biology of desire, the chemistry of longing, the physics of probability that makes some people parents easily and others wait years for something that might never come. What I didn't understand was that the person closest to me could use my own expertise against me, that my identical twin could wear my face to steal my future, and that I would spend 9 years loving my own child without knowing he was mine. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, this is where we talk about the families that mirror us and the reflections that lie. Subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by someone who looked exactly like you. Hit the bell. The next story might be the one you couldn't see coming. Here's my story. Natalie and I were born 12 minutes apart. I was first, the elder by barely enough time to matter, the one who came out screaming while she followed, quiet, observing, already calculating the advantage of being second. We were identical in every way that genetics could determine. Same dark hair, same almond eyes, same build that our mother called willowy and we called impossible to shop for. We shared a room until we were 14, finished each other's sentences, wore each other's clothes, learned to confuse teachers and friends and eventually ourselves about which one of us was which. But we were never the same. I was the serious one, the studious one, the one who spent Saturday nights with biology textbooks while Natalie was at parties, who applied to medical school while Natalie was backpacking through Europe, who became a doctor while Natalie became Natalie. Charismatic, impulsive, beautiful in ways that attracted attention without requiring effort. She collected experiences the way I collected credentials, and for a long time, I believed that her life was fuller than mine, that my discipline was a kind of poverty, that her freedom was something I had sacrificed for security. We loved each other. I want to be clear about that. The competition between us was constant but not cruel, at least not then. We were sisters before we were rivals, twins before we were enemies. We called each other other half, and meant it, in the way that children mean things before they learn that halves can be unequal, that one can take from the other, that sharing a face doesn't mean sharing a soul. I was 32 when I was diagnosed with severe endometriosis. The diagnosis came during my fellowship in reproductive endocrinology, which was either poetic or cruel, depending on how you looked at it. I was studying the systems that were failing me, learning to treat conditions that had already claimed my fertility. My ovarian reserve was compromised. The doctor who gave me the news was a colleague, someone who spoke gently because she knew what I knew, that time was short, that options were limited, that if I wanted biological children I needed to act quickly. I acted. I extracted 18 eggs, the maximum my diminished reserve would allow. I paid for 5 years of cryogenic storage in advance. I told myself I was being practical, preserving possibility, keeping doors open while I finished my training, built my practice, found the right partner to walk through them with. Natalie was 32 too, of course. She was between relationships, between jobs, between the phases of a life that never seemed to require planning. She came with me to the extraction, held my hand, made jokes about how I was putting my eggs in one basket, literally. She was supportive in the way Natalie was supportive, present, affectionate, slightly detached from the gravity of situations she didn't personally face. "You'll be a great mom someday," she said afterward, as we ate ice cream in my apartment, me cramping from the procedure, her scrolling through dating apps. "When you're ready, when you've checked all the boxes, when the timing is perfect." There was something in her voice, not jealousy exactly, something more complicated. Assessment. The same look I'd seen when we were children, when I'd won a spelling bee or gotten a better grade. The look that said she was calculating whether my victory mattered to her own standing. I didn't think about it then. I was too focused on recovery, on work, on the future I was building with the careful precision that defined everything I did. I should have paid attention. I should have seen that Natalie never liked being second, not even by 12 minutes, not even in a race she hadn't chosen to run. Natalie was 35 when she found out she was infertile. I was 35 too, of course. We were always the same age, always at the same point in time, always connected by biology even when our lives diverged. She called me from a doctor's office in Los Angeles. She'd been living there for 2 years, working in marketing, dating a series of men who were exciting and temporary. I'd seen her twice in those years. The twin connection that had been so strong in childhood had weakened with distance, with time, with the growing recognition that we didn't actually like each other very much. Fallopian tube damage, she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of the Natalie performance I was used to. From an infection I didn't treat, chlamydia apparently. I didn't know I had it. I didn't know it could do this. I'm sorry, I said, and I was. Despite everything, I was sorry. Natalie had always wanted children, in the abstract way she wanted things passionately, until she didn't. Until the next want replaced it. But this was different. This was permanent. This was a door closing that wouldn't reopen. There's IVF, I said. Donor eggs, adoption, options. Natalie, there are always options. Donor eggs cost $30,000, she said. I don't have $30,000, I don't have a partner, I don't have the life that makes any of this make sense. I offered to help. Money, connections, my expertise in the field. I told her I'd find her the best clinics, the most affordable programs, the support she needed to navigate a system I understood intimately. She thanked me. She said she'd think about it. She said she needed time. I didn't hear from her for 3 months. When I did, she was different. Lighter, somehow, as if a decision had been made that lifted a weight. She told me she'd figured things out, that she was exploring alternatives, that she didn't want to talk about it yet. I was relieved. Natalie had always landed on her feet, always found solutions that my planning couldn't anticipate. I trusted that this would be the same. I was wrong. She had found a solution. She had found my solution, she just hadn't told me she was using it. Ethan was born when I was 36. Natalie called me from the hospital, ecstatic, exhausted, the new mother I was supposed to be someday. She'd used a sperm donor, she said. She decided to do it alone, to be a single mother, to stop waiting for the perfect circumstances that might never arrive. I flew to Los Angeles the next day. I held him in the hospital, this tiny person with dark hair and almond eyes that could have been mine, that were mine in some ways I couldn't articulate. I felt something shift in my chest, some recognition that went beyond aunt and nephew, some connection that I attributed to twin intuition, to shared genetics, to the uncanny bond that people always asked about. He's beautiful, I said. Natalie, he's perfect. I know, she said, and there was something in her voice, some note I couldn't identify, that I would later understand as the sound of someone who had stolen something precious and was watching the owner admire it without recognizing it as her own. I became the aunt who was present. I visited monthly, then biweekly as my practice allowed. I bought gifts, books, clothes, toys that were educational because I couldn't help myself. I attended birthday parties, sent packages, FaceTimed weekly to watch him grow. Natalie encouraged it. She seemed grateful for the support, the attention, the financial contributions I made without being asked. He loves his Aunt Naomi, she'd say. And I'd smile, feeling the warmth of connection, the satisfaction of being important to a child, even if I wasn't his mother. Ethan called me Aunt Nene when he was small, a name he invented that stuck. He'd run to me when I visited, climb into my lap, tell me stories about his day with the serious expression that reminded me of myself at his age. I loved him with an intensity that surprised me, that I told myself was normal for a devoted aunt, that I didn't examine too closely because examining it might reveal something I wasn't ready to face. I was 39 when Ethan, then 3, said something that lodged in my memory like a splinter. We were at the zoo, just the two of us while Natalie ran errands. He was looking at the monkeys, holding my hand, swinging our joined arms with the rhythm of his steps. Aunt Nene, he said, why do you look like Mommy? Because we're sisters, I said, twins, that means we came from the same place a long time ago. He considered this. So you're almost Mommy. Almost, I said, laughing, but not quite. He nodded, satisfied. I wish you were almost Mommy every day, he said. Then I could have 2 mamas like in the books. I squeezed his hand. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know that he was expressing something closer to truth than either of us understood. I didn't know that Natalie was listening around the corner, her face pale, her hands shaking, her stolen victory suddenly feeling fragile. The years passed. Ethan grew. I continued my practice, my visits, my life that was full but not complete, successful but not satisfied. I dated occasionally, ended things when they became serious, told myself I was waiting for the right person, the right time, the right circumstances to use the eggs I'd frozen, to become the mother I'd planned to be. Natalie moved back to San Francisco when Ethan was 6. She said she wanted to be closer to family, to me, to the support system that had become increasingly important as she navigated single motherhood. I welcomed her. I helped her find an apartment, a school for Ethan, a community that would embrace them both. She was different now. Less spontaneous, more guarded, quicker to deflect questions about Ethan's conception, about the donor, about the details she'd once shared freely. I attributed it to motherhood, to maturity, to the natural evolution of a woman who had shouldered responsibility alone. I was wrong. She was guarding a secret that had grown heavier with each passing year, each of Ethan's questions about his origins, each of my visits where I commented on his resemblance to our family, his mannerisms that mirrored mine, the ways he was so much like his aunt that Natalie would laugh about with a tightness in her voice I chose not to hear. I was 45 when I found out, not because Natalie told me, not because I suspected, because of an audit. My clinic was reviewing old records, standard procedure, checking for discrepancies in storage and usage. I wasn't involved directly. I was department head now, my clinical hours reduced, my administrative responsibilities expanded. But I reviewed the final report, the summary of findings, the list of irregularities that required attention. One entry stopped me, a release of cryopreserved eggs 9 years prior. Patient, Naomi Chen. Procedure, fertilization with donor sperm, embryo transfer to gestational carrier. Result, live birth. I didn't remember this procedure. I didn't remember authorizing this release. I didn't remember any of it. I checked the date. January 9 years ago. When Natalie was 35, when she was exploring alternatives, when she had called me 3 months after her infertility diagnosis, sounding lighter, as if a decision had lifted a weight, I checked the signature. Mine, apparently, but not mine. The loop on the capital N, the flourish Natalie had developed in childhood, the tick I had noticed but never considered significant. My sister had signed for me. My sister had used my eggs. My sister had given birth to my child. I sat in my office for an hour, the report in front of me, my heart rate elevated in a way that my medical knowledge recognized as dangerous. I didn't call Natalie. I didn't confront anyone. I simply sat with the knowledge that everything I believed about my life was wrong, that the child I loved as a nephew was actually my son, that my sister had stolen the one thing I couldn't replace, and given it back to me as a gift I hadn't known to refuse. I confronted Natalie at her apartment. I used my key she'd given me 1 year ago for emergencies, for the times when she needed me to pick up Ethan from school, to be present in his life in ways that I now understood were not accidental but necessary, the infrastructure of a deception that required my participation even without my knowledge. She was making dinner. Ethan was at a friend's house, due back in an hour. The timing was deliberate, mine, not hers. I wanted to see her alone, to watch her face when I asked, to have the space to react without Ethan witnessing whatever came next. Naomi, she said, turning from the stove, smiling the smile that was my smile, the face that was my face, the person who was not me but had worn my identity like a costume. You're early. I wasn't expecting, is Ethan mine? The smile froze. The spatula in her hand stopped stirring. I watched the calculation happen behind eyes that were identical to mine, assessment of denial versus confession, the weighing of options that had narrowed to nothing. Naomi, I can explain, is Ethan mine? She set down the spatula. She turned off the stove. She sat at the kitchen table, the table where I'd eaten dozens of meals, where I'd celebrated holidays, where I'd built a relationship with a child I now understood was mine by biology if not by birthright. Yes, she said. Biologically, but I carried him. I gave birth to him. I raised him. I'm his mother, Naomi, in every way that matters. Except the way that created him, I said. My voice was flat, controlled, the voice I used with patience receiving bad news, the voice that delivered truth without cruelty. You stole my eggs, you forged my signature. You used my genetic material without consent. Do you understand what that is, Natalie? Do you understand what you've done? I wanted a child, she said, not defensive. Exhausted. The sound of someone who had carried a secret too long, whose performance had become indistinguishable from reality. I was infertile, you had eggs, you weren't using them, you were waiting for perfect circumstances that might never come. I gave them purpose, I gave them life. You gave yourself my child, I said. You made me an aunt to my own son, you let me love him without knowing. You let me, I stopped. The emotion I'd been holding back surged. The grief and rage and terrible recognition of what I'd lost, what she'd taken, what we had both become. Why didn't you ask? I said. Why didn't you tell me? Why this deception? Because you would have said no, Natalie said. Because you would have wanted control. Because you would have been the mother, the doctor, the perfect one, and I would have been the infertile sister who needed charity. I wanted to be a mother, Naomi, not your patient, not your project, not your second choice. I looked at her, at my face, worn by different choices, shaped by different fears. I thought about the 9 years of Ethan's life, the moments I'd missed without knowing I was missing them, the first steps and first words that I'd experienced as aunt rather than mother, the love I'd given that was real but misdirected, genuine but based on a lie. Does he know? I asked. No, Natalie said. He's 9. He knows he's from a donor. He doesn't know the donor was your eggs. He doesn't know she stopped. He doesn't know. I want to tell him, I said. No. The word was sharp, desperate, the first real emotion she'd shown. You can't, it would destroy him, it would destroy us. It would destroy everything I've built. You should have thought about that before you built it on theft, I said. I left. I didn't take anything. I didn't make threats. I simply walked out of the apartment where my son lived, where my sister had built a life from my genetic material, where everything I understood about family had been rewritten without my consent. I didn't speak to Natalie for 6 months. I didn't sue her, though I could have. Fraud, identity theft, unauthorized use of genetic material, crimes that carried prison sentences. I didn't report her to medical boards or licensing bodies. I simply stopped, frozen in a space between action and understanding, unable to decide what justice looked like when the perpetrator was also the mother of my child. But I couldn't stop seeing Ethan. The court order I obtained wasn't for custody, it was for Aunt's visitation rights, the legal fiction that Natalie and I had maintained, now formalized through a system that didn't know the truth. I saw him every other weekend, at my apartment, in parks, at museums. I watched him with new eyes, seeing my gestures in his hands, my expressions in his face, my serious approach to the world in his constant questions about how things worked. Aunt Nene, he said one Saturday, 6 months after my discovery, we were at the Science Museum watching a demonstration about DNA. Why do I look like you and Mommy? Most kids don't look like their aunts. Because your Mommy and I are twins, I said. We share the same DNA, the same building blocks. So when you look like her, you also look like me. He considered this. So you're almost my mom too. The question stopped me. It was the same question he'd asked at 3 at the zoo, the question that had lodged in my memory like prophecy. I looked at him, 9 years old enough to understand complexity, young enough to still believe in simple answers. Yes, I said. The word came out before I could stop it, before I could consider the consequences, before I could protect the lie that Natalie had constructed. I'm almost your mom. In some ways, I am your mom, but your mommy is the one who carried you and loves you and takes care of you every day, and that matters more than biology. He nodded, serious, processing. I love you both, he said. But differently. Mommy is, Mommy, your Aunt Nene. I don't want you to be the same. I want you to be both. I held him. I didn't cry. I had learned to control my emotions with the same precision I applied to medical procedures. But inside, something shifted. The rigid categories I'd constructed, mother, aunt, thief, victim, began to blur. Ethan didn't need me to be his mother instead of Natalie. He needed me to be present, to be honest, to be something he could count on without the structure of labels that adults imposed on children. I decided, in that moment, what my response would be. Not revenge, not litigation, not the destruction of the family that Natalie had built, even if she'd built it on theft. I would be what Ethan needed. I would be present. I would be honest. And I would use my expertise to ensure that what happened to me could never happen to anyone else. I worked with California legislators to draft the Familial Gamete Protection Act. It required notarized consent from both parties for the use of genetic material between relatives, with criminal penalties for violations. The law was controversial. Reproductive rights advocates worried about restrictions, medical professionals worried about bureaucracy. But I testified publicly as a doctor who had been victimized by someone who exploited familial trust and medical access. I didn't name Natalie. I didn't need to. The media found her, found Ethan, found the story that I had tried to keep private. Natalie was furious, humiliated, exposed in ways that my silence had protected her from. She accused me of revenge, of using legislation as punishment, of destroying her life to satisfy my grievance. I didn't defend myself. I let the work speak. The law passed. Other states adopted similar measures. Women contacted me anonymously with stories of their own sisters who had stolen eggs, husbands who had used embryos without consent, families where genetic material had been treated as communal property rather than individual right. I built a network, a community, a movement that transformed my personal violation into collective protection. And I contacted the sperm bank Natalie had used. I discovered what she had hidden, that she'd lied on forms, marked the donor as direct relative, when he wasn't, falsified medical history, violated multiple protocols. The bank, fearing litigation, offered information: 9 other children from the same donor. Ethan's half-siblings scattered across states, raised by families who didn't know they were connected. I contacted them, not as mother, as concerned aunt. I shared medical information that Natalie had hidden genetic tendencies, conditions to monitor, the importance of tracking. I created a registry, a support group, a community of families linked by biology but separated by deception. Some became friends, some became allies. All became part of a network that ensured Ethan's genetic heritage wouldn't be lost in the silence Natalie had constructed. The hardest part was telling Ethan the truth. Not alone, with a child therapist, with Natalie present by court order, in a room designed for difficult conversations. I was 46 by then, Ethan 10, old enough to understand complexity but young enough to be wounded by it. He listened as I explained that his mommy had used my eggs to create him, that I was his biological mother but not his birth mother, that both of us loved him in different ways at different times with different claims that weren't mutually exclusive. I have 2 moms, he said finally. The same conclusion he'd reached at 3 at the zoo, the simple truth that adults had complicated with theft and deception. Like in the books, but you don't like each other. We love each other, I said, but we hurt each other, and we're trying to figure out how to stop. Then figure it out, he said, because I don't want to choose and I shouldn't have to. He was right, we figured it out. Not quickly, not completely, not with the forgiveness that neither of us was capable of yet. But we figured out how to share space, how to attend school events without tension, how to be present for Ethan without making him the battlefield of our unresolved conflict. Natalie went to therapy. Individual, not court-ordered, chosen finally by her own recognition that something in her was broken beyond what theft could fix. She worked on her rivalry with me, her need to win, her inability to ask for what she needed rather than taking what she wanted. She found work with a fertility advocacy organization, using her experience, her crime, her redemption, to help others navigate the emotional complexity of donor conception, of infertility, of the desperate choices that drive people to destruction. I didn't forgive her, not completely, not with the clean slate that some stories require. But I learned to coexist with my lack of forgiveness, to hold it alongside my love for Ethan, to accept that family can be damaged without being destroyed, fractured without being finished. Ethan is 15 now. He changed his name last year, not legally, but socially, to Chen Morrison, combining Natalie's married name with our shared family name. He did it himself, without asking either of us, announcing it at dinner with the certainty of someone who has decided who he is regardless of who made him. I'm from both of you, he said. And both of you are from me. Names should show that. Natalie and I looked at each other across the table. The same face, shaped by different choices, meeting in the person we had both created but neither could claim exclusively. We didn't agree, we didn't forgive. But we both nodded because Ethan was right and because some truths are bigger than the grievances that contain them. I have a photograph in my office, not of Ethan alone. Of the 3 of us, me, Natalie, Ethan at his middle school graduation. We are not touching. We are not smiling at each other. But we are present, separated by the space of incomplete reconciliation, but united by the person who stands between us, literally and figuratively. I look at that photograph when I explain to patients about egg freezing, about reserves, about time. I tell them about options, about preservation, about the importance of controlling their genetic future. And I think about my sister, who wore my face to steal my future, and about my son, who wears both our faces as he builds his own. I think about the eggs I gave, unknowing, and the love I gave, knowing, and the family that emerged from theft and truth, and the slow, imperfect work of learning to share what cannot be divided. I'm Dr. Naomi Chen. I'm 45 years old. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist, a biological mother, an aunt, a woman who learned that the sister who shared her face could steal her future, and that the future could still be worth living. And if you've ever loved someone you didn't know was yours, if you've ever had to build family from the wreckage of deception, this one's for you. See you in the next story.